Now, without further delay, I would like to welcome our guest speakers, Adam Cheeseman, who is the Program Director at Nature NB, an organization whose mandate is to celebrate, conserve, and protect New Brunswick's natural heritage through education, networking, and collaboration. Adam's work involves managing climate change adaptation projects, which focus on building capacity and expertise for nature-based approaches. Our second speaker is Alison McKay, a conservation planner at Birds Canada. Alison holds a doctorate in ecology from the University of Sherbrooke. As a conservation planner, Alison works with communities and stakeholders to identify conservation strategies rooted in science, local knowledge, and socioeconomics that address community needs, the health of our ecosystems, and species at risk. Now I'll be handing it over to both of you guys.
Perfect. Thanks, everybody, and thanks for the invitation to be part of the webinar series and for yeah, this is a great opportunity for us. We're here today to talk about a project that Nature NB and Birds Canada are part of, but is actually a large partnership of a number of organizations and groups across Eastern New Brunswick. And this project is called Welig Bamjajiga Siknik, or Côtes en Santé NB, Healthy Coast NB. And so this is a project that has been around since 2019 and is supported primarily through Environment and Climate Change Canada, the province of New Brunswick through the Environmental Trust Fund, as well as the New Brunswick Wildlife Trust Fund. And we, I'm just going to talk a little bit about the project in general, and then we'll kind of highlight some case studies looking at this theme of kind of blending community, climate adaptation, and biodiversity and species at risk benefits in different projects. So just a quick snapshot. This is our team of various different organizations that are involved in our initiative. And as I mentioned, we came together as a project team in 2019, and we're funded primarily through what's called the Community Nominated Priority Places Initiative through Environment and Climate Change Canada. And we focus on kind of a range of different things, looking at communications, education, species at risk monitoring, climate adaptation work, the list goes on and on. So in terms of project scope, we're focused in the Eastern New Brunswick coast. So essentially, we work in communities across essentially the New Brunswick coast from the Quebec border down to the Nova Scotia border. And in the first year of the project, we made an effort to understand kind of which areas we would want to start working in that had some capacity built in them, or areas where we needed more conservation capacity. And so we currently work in the communities listed here, and we have some projects that touch the whole project scope, and then we have kind of focused local teams within each one of these areas that advances their own community-based conservation plans and identifies actions that we can take as a collective to help adapt to climate change, protect species at risk, and respond to the needs and kind of interests of community in those areas. So our focus is really on a number of kind of holistic approaches that align with these principles. So we focus on supporting ecosystem restoration. We support connectedness to nature. So a lot of our focus is also on education and engagement within our priority communities and then our project area. Climate resilience is obviously a big one for us as well, where we're focused on integrating nature-based climate solutions and adaptation measures, and supporting kind of the integration of adaptation planning and adaptation perspectives with a biodiversity lens and a species at risk lens and a community lens. We also are fortunate to be able to provide economic support to local environmental organizations who work in these areas, like watershed groups, for example, to support their work and connect with our broader mandate. And we have a number of initiatives focused on cultural respect and awareness, as well as community engagement. So we have within our project team and externally, a big focus on integrating Mi'kmaq cultural education, as well as understanding kind of the cultural diversity of the space that we're working in. And then we have a focus on species stewardship. So we do species at risk monitoring work. We do, engage in various different projects and support community level projects that help to support species of conservation concern, whether that be through some of the projects that we'll talk about shortly, or through things like engaging communities in beach cleanup and species at risk monitoring workshops and these sorts of things. So a little bit more about what we do. We engage in conservation planning. So we host, various team meetings. And as I mentioned, each one of our priority communities, we have local teams that work to, develop and establish and implement community-based conservation plans. We focus on cultural education. So that it might be cultural programming that includes training and professional development for partners, and also things like school programming. We support kind of a wide variety of monitoring, stewardship, and restoration activities related to the project and the project area. So this could be anything from supporting, bank swallow restoration work, which Allison will talk about later, all the way through to endemic species and species with very small ranges like the Gulf of St. Lawrence aster. And finally, we do a number of pieces on communications and engagement and community engagement. So we actually have our own website dedicated to this project, which I'll have a link for shortly if you are interested in checking that out. And we do a number of different communication strategies around social media and blog posts and then those sorts of things to continually engage and educate about our initiative. And we are, so essentially our approach, as I've been talking about, is coming back to the theme of today's webinar, really focused on that idea of blending and finding these kind of win-win-win solutions that blend nature, climate, and community. So identifying, what are community members concerned about? What are they interested in? What kind of adaptation risks or climate risks are they facing, and how do we need to adapt to those? And also, where does that kind of lens on with species at risk and biodiversity considerations? And this is a really interesting area to be doing this work in, given that it's an area that is very susceptible to the changing climate from extreme weather and erosion perspectives and a number of other concerns. But it's also a big hotspot for species at risk and biodiversity. And at a core has a lot of communities within it that are very, very connected with nature and interested in what they can do to help support. And finally, the capacity building piece. So through this work, we're also trying to build the capacity of various different groups in the region to kind of create sustainable change that can be continued on after the end of our project. So just a few photos from over the years of some projects I'll just highlight, then I'll get into a little more specifics about one before passing it over to Allison. As I mentioned, we do various different education programs and outreach days as part of this. We have stewardship signage that's in place at many beaches and places where people access the coast within the area, which is our trilingual care for our coastline sign, which promotes various different stewardship practices. As I mentioned, we do lots of engagement with folks from all ages from our communities that we're working in to support that connectedness with nature. And what we try and do with this is provide them with hands-on things they can do to help support ecosystem restoration and climate resilience. And so these are some photos from a Living Shoreline event in Coquine. And then, of course, they have our conservation planning and team meetings and connections to kind of other similar types of projects going on throughout the Atlantic region.
So much.
So one such activity that was held was a Maram grass planting event on the island of Miscou. This community really got behind this project. They helped source the Maram grass, which can be really difficult to find. And they replanted this dune. This dune had experienced a lot of degradation and damage due to multiple factors, including some human caused damage by ATVs and tramplings and things like that. And then the dune experienced a breach during a storm, which damaged some ecosystems behind the dune and caused some concern for people in the area. So the community got together behind a Healthy Coast initiative, and they did some dune replanting. I believe this was a Nature Conservancy of Canada-led initiative, who are also partners in the Healthy Coast project. You can see some of the stats below. So they've done 3 successive years of restoration and planted a very large number of Maram grass plants in the area. So that project is going really well. Oh, Adam is back. Good, Adam. I was just ad-libbing about your Maram grass planting. So I got through a little bit of the like, what was done, but maybe now you could talk about, I think I'm about at the part where you hand things over to the community and they really start to run with it.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Allison. Thanks for jumping in there. And sorry, everybody, I was having a connection issue, but back, which is great. And I'm almost done my section, so you only have to bear with me for less than a minute. Yeah, so Allison talked a little bit about the Maram grass planting project and kind of the rationale behind it and who's been involved. And one kind of key element that you'll see as a common thread in the stories that I'll tell and Allison will tell is that and the theme of this webinar is really around the community needs. And so what was identified through some initial work with the community in Miscou around their conservation plan was that they wanted to have more opportunities to do something hands-on that protected the coast. And there was concerns around this particular area in terms of what was happening from impacts from extreme weather and some human disturbance. And so in the first year where some of this planting was done, the event and the approach and everything was organized by the Nature Conservancy of Canada, and the planting itself is actually on one of NCC's reserves on Miscou. And so this approach, led to some engagement from the community, mostly from the team of folks who had been involved in the project from the beginning. And what we've seen over the years is that there's been more and more people that have been engaged in this. There's been more and more interest in, well, how do we source different, additional plants? How do we get more people involved? And now, in talking with Jennifer White from NCC, who's the lead on this aspect of the project, she's actually seen, a big shift in being able to take a step back as a conservation organization and allow the community itself to, carry on this project year after year. And in this past iteration, Jen mentioned to me the other day, she was hardly even involved. She hardly had to do anything. She actually wasn't even able to make it the day of, and still they were able to get together and plant, more plants than they planted annually than any other time. So just to kind of highlight that kind of idea of starting with those community needs and what community is interested in, and finding how that fits in with what's needed from an adaptation perspective, what's needed from a biodiversity perspective, and finding those nice opportunities to work together. So I'll wrap up my section there and pass over to Allison.
Thanks, Adam. So for my section, where are we going here? So for my section, I'm going to talk to you about a community project involving the bank swallow. So the bank swallow is an aerial insectivore, so they catch insects on the wing and they nest in vertical eroding banks along the coastline or river shorelines, or sometimes in pits and quarries, anywhere where they can see that vertical face of sand and it's stable enough for them to nest. So a couple of you can probably see where this is going. So through the Healthy Coast project, we identified that bank swallow was a species of concern for each of the communities that were involved in Healthy Coasts, and that spurred the idea of an Atlantic Canada bank swallow working group so that we could get together and try to bring together resources and ideas and knowledge and try to set some pathways forward for helping this species kind of coexist alongside all of our climate adaptations that are happening on the coast in response to climate change. So one of the knowledge gaps that was identified through the working group was whether or not nature-based climate solutions such as living shorelines were compatible with bank swallow habitat. So what we kind of gathered was that some of the practices in living shorelines, and I'll get into it a little bit more, can still remove bank swallow habitat. So we wanted to design a pilot site where we tried to slow erosion using nature-based solutions, but we're also trying to maintain, we're explicitly trying to maintain the bank swallow nesting habitat within the bank. So the question is, can we slow erosion and maintain nesting habitat for bank swallows? This project began officially in 2021. As I mentioned, so this is an image of a typical bank swallow colony. So they nest many birds together, sometimes up to hundreds, and sometimes smaller colonies of around 10 or 20 can be found along our coast too. This is a medium-sized colony here. Bank swallows nest in 70-degree or more eroding slopes, so that's pretty vertical. And rock armoring covers nesting colonies and degrades the surrounding bluff. So it's very obvious where there's a conflict between rock armoring to stop erosion or mitigate climate effects on the coast and the need to have these open eroding faces for bank swallow nesting. But even nature-based solutions can harm bank swallow habitat. So some of the practices in nature-based solutions, such as regrading the slope, usually to less than 35 degrees, or revegetating the bank face, can also conflict with the habitat needs for bank swallows. So that's where this pilot project comes in. It's a community-led living shoreline project where in the U-Haul Beach Park in Bathurst, New Brunswick. Here are a lot of images. It took a lot of people from a lot of different organizations and a lot of community participation to get this ball rolling. We've also had partnerships with the province of New Brunswick for helping us track the erosion rate at the site and helping us develop species at risk. And the project is supported financially and through knowledge sharing with Environment and Climate Change Canada. So phase one was to revegetate the above slope. So many of you may know that erosion can come from different sources. It can come from rain runoff over a mowed lawn. So as that mowed lawn is compressed and the rainfall runs over the edge, it can take a lot of the soil with it. It can be wind erosion, or it can be erosion from the wave energy. So this first phase was to reduce erosion from rainfall running over the edge. So the desired effects are deeper roots to retain the soil and slow erosion caused by runoff. We did a lot of planting, as you can see all of those markers and all of those plants. So the goal is to introduce more and a more diverse root structure into the coastal bank to help solidify and reduce erosion. The co-benefits are more flying insects, which are prey for bank swallow, but also biodiversity in themselves and to increase the plant biodiversity. We also want to use this site as a seed source for the community so that they can come and collect native seed plants to plant on their own properties if they'd like. Phase two was this past May, where we erected a wattle fence. So that's a woven fence made from natural materials that were sourced nearby. This has the desired effects of retaining the sediment behind the fence. So it makes, as Helping Nature Heal, which was one of our main partners in this, Rosemary always refers to this as making it more sticky so that when sand and sediment are washed up, they get stuck in the wattle fence and help build up the beach instead. But you can see that we did not regrade the slope and we didn't plant vegetation on the slope face because that space is reserved for the bank swallow. We also planted a lot of moraine grass on either side of the wattle fence, and this is to encourage the establishment and the maintenance of the beach. And the wattle fence will hopefully deflect wave energy from the toe of the slope. Phase three is engaging the community for caretaking. We've been engaging the community all along, so phase three is not like a super distinct phase, but we're trying to incorporate more community input into the aesthetic of the area and the site. And we're also trying to get people more involved in the long-term care maintenance of the site. This would have the desired effects of strengthening the site by people returning year after year to plant sites from seeds that they collected on the site to add more and more roots and more stability. increase that biodiversity. Community contribute and learn about nature-based solutions in Bank Swallow. So this is also a site where people can come and they can see the bank swallow. We've lost 98% of this population in New Brunswick. So this is a rare sighting these days. So having that connection with this species is something that's very important. And as I mentioned, we want this site to become a seed source, either for the Moran grass or for some of the native species that are planted on the above slope. So something that was kind of a cross theme in a lot of the projects that have been happening through Healthy Coast and through other projects in the region is that it's very difficult to source native plants to do some of these restoration projects, especially for, well, it's difficult enough for like NGOs and groups that are organized, and it's especially difficult for just everyday homeowners or landowners that want to do some restoration work or want to rely on some nature-based solutions on their own properties. So having sites like this as a seed source where people can come and just take a little and then help spread that along the coast is an important goal of ours. So I can see that we are at time. So just very quickly, I'll run down sort of the differences between this and a typical living shoreline. As I mentioned, we did not regrade the slope. We kept the wattle fence lower than it would typically be to keep that slope face open. We did not plant on the bank face. Special maintenance might require hand pruning of plants that grow up in front of the bank face. So if some of those willows or other plants start to get a little bit bushy in front of the face, we don't want them to be a vehicle for predation or impede the bank swallow's like trajectory into the nest. So we would cut those back by hand. Also, working outside of the nesting season is probably the most important thing that you could do when you're working in these sensitive habitats, is to not cause additional stress or inadvertent harm by having a lot of people or equipment on the site during nesting. It's also important to consult authorities for critical habitat and permit requirements or species at risk recommendations. I believe that's my last slide. So thank you. I'm sorry I went a little bit over time, but very much looking forward to a conversation. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you.